Valve, the unicorn of gaming. The one company that pretty much everybody loves. Somehow, with only 336 employees, it's one of the highest valued companies in all of gaming and frequently praised and adored by most people. And I think that today, in 2025, it's mostly known for Steam. It's funny because if you look at their profile on X, it still says, "We make games, Steam, and hardware." Games is the first thing that Valve lists themselves as doing, despite not really making much of them anymore. And the track record of Valve making games is pretty damn good. Some people would say it can be spotty. There have been artifacts before. But when you look at global juggernauts like Counter-Strike or Dota or, the impact of Half-Life 2 and Portal in the world, Valve is one of those companies that when they decide to make games, you can pretty safely bet on them being excellent. And while I'm firmly in the camp that believes that Half-Life 3 is actually coming because there's compelling evidence to suggest that, this video is about the game that they are actually working on and consistently updating and at some point going to officially release. We're talking about Deadlock. And no, I'm not making this video to convince you to go and start playing Deadlock right now. I'm making it to explain why I believe that Deadlock is the freshest, most interesting, most well-designed multiplayer game and the most genuinely exciting live service anything that we've had in such a long time. And that even if it doesn't end up being the next big thing, it doesn't take away how special it is. Because Deadlock, ever since its initial kind of reveal to the public and the excitement that accompanied, hey, there's a new game by Valve and it is playable, it has received consistent updates and then transitioned into receiving less of those, but more major updates. And just in case you were paying attention or even played it back in September or so of last year, since then the map has been completely changed. Some of the core mechanics reworked. The game has gone from being a 4-lane game into being a 3-lane game, which completely changes a lot of how the game worked. A lot of the objectives in the game have changed, and most recently, they released a full rework of itemization and the shop, and we are witnessing in real time how Deadlock is kind of obtaining its identity and really honing in on what it wants to be. And there is so much about Deadlock that is exciting and worth looking into from many different perspectives, and I want to do that because I've been thinking and playing Deadlock for a pretty long time, and I'm excited about it. And even if you never intend to play it, I think that it's worth being excited about it too. You'll see what I mean. So hi, I'm Mug, and if you're new here, welcome, and if you're not new here, welcome back. You are looking fantastic today. Just wanted to say that. And also, if you like the way that I cover games in the industry and end up liking this video at some point, make sure to hit the like button. That helps the video reach more people, and I think Deadlock is just a really special game that deserves to be talked about more. But also, just in case your flavor of game is not competitive third-person shooter, high mobility MOBAs, and you prefer something else, this video does have a sponsor, Crystal of Atlan, and it's a brand new Magipunk MMO action RPG, and it launches worldwide on the 28th of May. In it, you get to choose from over 10 different classes right at the start to embark on an adventure. You join the Thornbird Guild and start to explore the ancient secrets and the futuristic magic of the world of Atlan. And you can expect the usual dungeon diving and completing raids with friends, but what really sells Crystal of Atlan for me is that it takes very heavy inspiration from deep action combat systems, where good skill management and inputs actually matter. And if you're a fan of the channel, you already know how often I talk about Devil May Cry and Bayonetta. Which, funny to mention, since Crystal of Atlan places a lot of emphasis on its vertical combat system, making sure that juggles and using the vertical plane is a thing that you do very often. And that for me is what matters most. If you're interested in a combat system like that, in an MMO like this, then I recommend you pre-register using the link down below. Pre-registering will give you some extra outfits and cosmetics at launch, but also you can even sign up to get some real-life prizes like an iPhone 16 Pro Max or a PS5 Pro. And remember, that's coming out on the 28th of May, along with the new classes for the Fighter and the Magician, which if you're wondering, yes, that's the one that I think looks the coolest. Call me basic, I don't care. I like that one. So you know how it works, head down below, and thank you to Crystal of Atlan for sponsoring this video. Alright, so just in case you don't know anything about it, Deadlock is a combination of a MOBA and a third-person shooter. A MOBA in the sense that all of the different characters have 4 abilities as well as some passives or other intricacies to them that are of course pretty important to playing them correctly and achieving the final goal of pushing the 3 lanes and reaching the enemy base and taking it out, but a shooter in the sense that it is just, well, a third-person shooter. You run around, controlling your character directly and making sure that you aim your shots precisely, with a lot of the game being your ability to hit targets, specifically moving targets that are moving quite a lot, because Deadlock has a lot of emphasis on mobility, be that through some of the abilities or just the general mobility that all characters have innate to them, including the ability to dash at pretty much any moment, to dash in the air, to slide down parts of the map or to slide out of a dash, to wall jump, to dash jump for extra immediate mobility, and to chain a lot of those things all together into some pretty kooky things that honestly remind me of Guns the Duel. Does anybody remember Guns the Duel? No? I'm gonna just sit here alone and cry about it. All of these basic mechanics are then fused with the economy system and the creeps that you would expect from a MOBA, more in line with Dota 2 than something like League of Legends, in the sense that items in Deadlock can actually very directly affect some of your abilities, granting you larger range on them, additional effects on them, or completely refreshing your cooldowns and things like that, which are much more impactful effects on your moment-to-moment gameplay compared to something like League of Legends, where normally you're stat checking and adding effects and passives instead of enhancing or synergizing those effects with innate parts of your character's kit. So far, you might think that Deadlock is not just pretty niche and a pretty skill-intensive game with a lot of knowledge and just, you know, a very high skill floor, which you'd be right. But you might also think that doesn't sound that new or exciting, and you could even point at something like Overwatch and their new Overwatch Stadium, which at this point I hope is just the future of Overwatch, as another example of implementing this progression system of your character throughout a match, that MOBA style progression system of having things in the middle of the game in its mechanics that allow you to obtain an objective advantage, and a strategic one, over your opponents, blended into a core gameplay. In this case, the third-person shooting, or in the case of Overwatch, well, actually, also the third-person shooting now, but technically also first-person. But the reason that I am obsessed with Deadlock, and just the potential and the masterclass that it is at what it does, has nothing to do with just how original or not its core idea is, and instead has a lot to do with even the tiniest decisions that are made in the design of the game, and how those all lead up to a perfect execution of the idea. Now, I said at the beginning of this video that this isn't me trying to convince you to play Deadlock, and that's because it might not be for you. Hey, if you want to try it out, that's good, and hopefully if the game does at some point actually come out and be popular, you'll have a head start on the competition, I guess. But that's not the point here. The point is, have you ever played a video game where at every turn you just keep thinking, holy crap, these guys thought of it. These guys knew what they were going for, and the moment that you said it would be cool if this worked this way, and then it does, and you just go, man, this is just impeccable. Like, your mind is just blown over and over again at just how much they nail different things. Well, Deadlock is a masterclass in what a multiplayer hero shooter should be. And I think that the best way of framing those lessons is by kind of imagining the new player experience and just mimicking the experience of being surprised or happy at all of those specifics. One of Deadlock's biggest cons is its skill floor. It kind of demands that you're already very familiar with how a MOBA works, and the team elements of it, and the cooldown management of it, and just keeping track of a lot of information, as well as the strategic decisions necessary for things like itemization and countering builds and target priority, as well as the prerequisite of intimate character knowledge to know what to do. And if you're already familiar with all of those things, it just layers on top of it a pretty demanding and precise shooter that in teamfights does require some pretty high APM reaction times, spinning the camera and getting the perfect headshot. And normally you would say that that is a surefire way of making your game fail, because absolutely nobody will want to jump into it and play it. But that is where three essential elements of Deadlock come in that I've never seen executed so well. And yes, I do have an ungodly amount of hours in games like League of Legends and Overwatch, Marvel Rivals. It's bad. Just don't look at me. Deadlock looks to offset the skill floor by making it so that, firstly, the experience of controlling your character feels amazing from moment one. Every character is snappy, every hitbox precise. The feel of each character's unique weapon and the recoil and the characteristics of it just feels right, and the feedback on what you do is always satisfying. Deadlock played at a lower level is a considerably different game, as happens with these sorts of games in general. And a lot of people being able to get into it will depend on having a lot of low skill players constantly coming in to kind of learn the ropes together. But in that initial experience, the ideal scenario that you can start to experiment with the game with other people of your skill level, what sells you on continuing to play and beginning to absorb the amount of knowledge and things that are in the game is the immediate feel of just playing it. Just how cool a lot of the things feel, just how much depth there is to be discovered nugget by nugget, but how at its core it just feels good to move around, to jump, to dash, to shoot, to use your abilities. It's all crisp, clean, and satisfying. I think that for a pretty long time within the video game sphere, we've used the word game feel, and if you prefer to use that, Deadlock's with every patch, with every refinement, is just better. The second element, though, are the characters themselves. Deadlock's cast has been expanding pretty quickly, and if sources are to be trusted, one of the big next updates is fleshing that cast out even more so that there's a healthy amount of heroes for a potential pick and ban system to be implemented at some point. And while the overall aesthetic and lore of Deadlock is something that I particularly enjoy, Fables style merging of fairy tales and the demon world with the normal world in a slightly 1920s, 1930s noir detective New York, even beyond how cool thematically a lot of what's happening is, every character is very unique in a way that it feels like it's your own when you find the one that you really connect with. The overall goals and requirements of characters are very different in Deadlock, and they have been refined over time to fulfill their roles more and more specifically, and especially if you decide to lean into them. Remember, you are still buying a ton of items that will drastically change how your character plays. And while a lot of the core ideas that you might recognize are executed in the game, from having your frontline tanks to your backline assassins, from disruptors to scaling hyper carries to supports and mages, all of them feel very unique and like they can suit a particular playstyle and make up for a lot of a player's deficiencies. Make no mistake that at the end of the day, top-level Deadlock requires for you to be a master of not just your character, but of every element that the game offers you. What I'm saying is, there are characters here, characters like Calico or Abram, that, for example, don't rely that much on having good aim and good tracking of moving targets, and instead utilize CC and melee with their huge hitboxes and mobility to just pummel the competition into the ground without really needing to rely on aiming. But playing them to an optimal level does mean weaving in the best of your shots and not missing them. But really, that sort of requirement is only reserved for the top 1% of players. And it means that there is a very, very high skill ceiling as well. But for most people, if you suck at aiming, there's characters that really don't focus on aiming that much. If aiming is your strong suit, there's characters that deal more with that. And if you like being sneaky and having great positioning and using crowd control on the opponents in order to dominate a team fight with a clutch play, you have that without really having to rely too much on the other parts of the skill set required. It's the fact that all of these characters are so well designed and filled to the brim with personality that means that you can really attach yourself to one and say, hey, I really resonate with this character's playstyle and with the intricacies of it. Intricacies of the type that you'd expect in any good MOBA, where you can easily sink hundreds, if not thousands of hours into a single character to master them. But it nails the experience of finding the one that speaks to you. But the third element is how it doesn't sacrifice those things or your potential for growth as a player in a competitive game around the fundamental design of the character. Itemization, which is Deadlock's latest update and bound to have some more reworks along the way as people adjust, complain, and have feedback of the pretty radical changes that it's had in this last update, have led to a game that requires more decision making in how specific you want to be with the build you're looking at or your character. And that's just another part of knowing your character and what you can kind of aim for depending on what the situation requires. And again, we're talking about some pretty brilliant design here, but to really exemplify this, I want to highlight my two mains, McGinnis and Geist. McGinnis is the turret builder of the game, a hybrid support character that specializes in controlling the battlefield and kind of setting up traps, setting up the ideal situation for a team fight to go in your favor. She's one of the less mobile characters. Her minigun needing to really rev up to do damage solidifies her as a slower moving character that just fits in more with her overall playstyle being something that requires setup. Her general abilities are being able to place turrets, which can eventually slow down characters or debuff them. Her second ability allows her to place a healing field that also buffs allies in it, and the healing can get pretty high, meaning that it can easily turn a team fight, and the size of the area of healing scales with your spirit power or your AP if you come from League of Legends. And her third ability summons a wall that for a pretty long time just directly changes the battlefield, blocking off people from coming in, gaining time to escape, or locking enemies in very uncomfortable positions, and sometimes maybe, killing your allies in the process. Her ultimate is a devastatingly high damage AoE Spirit Barrage that allows her to continue moving while just kind of pelting an area with these bombs that can also end up debuffing enemies, but just doing a ton of damage. And what's magical about a character like McGinnis in Deadlock is that whatever you're thinking is the optimal build for her, you're probably wrong, because it's really hard to say that there is an optimal one, and instead, there's just slightly better ones given the circumstances of a map. You could ignore a lot of the more intentional parts of McGinnis's design and focus on just a couple of them to lean into a completely different build that might just be the perfect thing for the match you're in. One of my favorite McGinnis builds at the moment is completely ignoring the turrets and exclusively using them to reload, since there's a pretty good item that you can tie to an ability, and when you use it, you automatically reload. Instead, what this build does is take advantage of McGinnis's huge ammo pool and her minigun to start applying on-hit ramping damage on people with it, and taking advantage of her healing field and the rate of fire increase that it provides along with survivability for you to just sit in it and shoot people, mowing them down while still taking advantage of your wall to disrupt fights, interrupt enemies, and set up the perfect firing range. With a build like this, the turrets are more of an afterthought, used completely differently within the context of a fight, and your ultimate, while it can still be useful, does a lot less damage than just shooting, meaning that it turns into a pretty useful skill for kind of zoning or scaring people off or farming the jungle. But you could also go the complete opposite route and make it so McGinnis's minigun doesn't really do any damage, but you have the ability of constantly spamming turrets that will distract enemies with their tankiness and deal significant amounts of damage that continues to ramp as you set up a perfect trap in which you then just maybe execute them with your ultimate. You could go into any sort of hybrid of these things, or even lean into exclusively supporting people and making sure that you buy different items, including actives, that will allow you to rescue your teammates from difficult situations, using your wall to really help them out and facilitate escapes, and using a massive healing field with its healing amplified to keep your entire team alive. The fact that this character contains this wide spectrum gradient of different playstyles to learn and master, all just within one character, is what means that once you find what you like in Deadlock, your knowledge of the game will naturally expand, even if you never touch another character. But the other brilliant part of design that is absolutely nailed by Deadlock at the moment is an integral part of games like this, which is the feeling of power progression within a match. A large part of the addictiveness of these sorts of games is the high you get from really playing well right from the start, getting an advantage over your enemy, and reaching a completely different plane of power by the end of a match. The distinct feeling of moving from an early game to a mid game to late game team fights, and feeling the difference of your character throughout those stages and what you're meant to do ideally in them as you execute your perfect plan. It is the constant roller coaster that you are signing up for whenever you queue up for a game that really differentiates something like a MOBA from something like, well, Overwatch is doing the exact same thing now, so, but you get my point. But let's say Marvel Rivals. Even with all of the flexibility and how transformative itemization is in Deadlock, the feeling of reaching late game or having a distinct advantage over the enemy team, just how well your power scales, and the overall feeling of gaining that power and then using it is just downright perfect. And I think that the best character for me to show you this is Lady Geist. Lady Geist follows a pretty typical archetype of character. Unlike pretty much every other character where there is no mana resource in Deadlock, it's just the cooldowns on your abilities, Geist needs to sacrifice a bit of her life in order to use her abilities, and in exchange for that, they're pretty strong. But that sacrificing HP for power is integral to her design, with her abilities kind of divided in two. Her first and most essential ability is her bomb. You just throw a bomb that occupies an area and explodes shortly thereafter, dealing damage. Of course, this will take some of your HP every time you use it, but your second ability allows you to steal the life of a character with a point-and-click tether that then you have to maintain line of sight for. Her third ability has her throw out blood shards, which cost quite a pretty penny in HP, but not just deal damage and slow the enemies very briefly, but allow her to stack up those blood shards and amplify her damage, meaning that right from the start, the game is informing you that she excels at longer engagements where she can stack up her damage amp. And since you will be sacrificing so much health to deal damage, her ultimate ability allows her to swap her current HP with a different character. Meaning that if Lady Geist is spamming her abilities at you and hitting you with all of them, she's killing you. But if she's spamming her abilities missing and just kind of dwindling her HP, getting in too close to confirm the kill could completely reverse the situation for you. Meaning that she can be a huge threat that most people, especially late game, do not want to tackle in a 1v1 under any circumstance if her ultimate is up. All of these things are paired with her primary weapon being her revolver, low ammo capacity, but high damage, precise weapon. My preferred build for Lady Geist at the moment is one where the difference between her more fragile and calculated playstyle, where each ability use needs to be carefully measured towards if you actually hit the ability, meaning that it was worth the cost, and scales her into a late-game life-stealing tank that is constantly spamming her abilities to the point that the health cost of them doesn't matter anymore, with incredibly low cooldowns that is just a menace and a priority target that requires the enemy team to focus her down like a true raid boss. And oh boy, if her ultimate is up, you're gonna have to do it twice. Meaning that it rewards excellent itemization, excellent positioning and use of your abilities to control the fight, excellent aim in actually hitting your shots on the targets that you have amplified damage on, and the cooldown tracking and foresight to know what's going to be the best target to use your ultimate on once you kind of spend your life as a resource, as a tank, and need to refill. How all of this comes together in the feeling of a hyper carry that Geist can be in endgame when built in that direction is simply glorious, and it is so addictive that it is difficult to stop queuing up over and over again. And this isn't even beginning to touch on some of those details that I mentioned of the experience of feeling like every little thing has been thought out. Like how while you're sliding, you don't consume ammo for your primary weapon, meaning that careful consideration of terrain and managing to slide throughout fights helps with your ammo conservation and overall damage output. How the entire map that isn't just the lane and even some of the lanes contain little breakable objects which offer permanent buffs, from reducing your overall cooldown, to adding more max health, to giving you more souls, the game's currency for its economy, fire rate, weapon damage, all sorts of things. If you are staying on top of everything, controlling the map also means controlling buffs that can slowly stack up to be very meaningful, but it also requires careful control of lanes to not lose objectives and allow you the freedom to roam the map, getting all of those buffs and jungling. That overall control and the focus on objectives like the urn and the rejuvenator at the center of the map are currently in a state where their balance and their impact is pretty well done, and it feels very rewarding to control all of the mechanics in both macro and micro in the game and just kind of dominating. And the most impressive part about Deadlock is that it is far from finished. The decision to just have this game be out there and playable with the amount of drastic changes and borderline broken to unfinished content that can sometimes sneak its way into a build is really brave in a way, especially considering the pedigree that Valve normally holds. It's also the fact that it's just kind of a money sink at this point. It's a project that's being actively worked on within Valve, but their own internal expectations on it aren't very clear, and it definitely feels like a passion project, with some of the latest people to join the team being, for example, some of the members of Hopu Games, which are responsible for Risk of Rain 2, and yes, you can definitely feel their impact on the game now, and if you like Risk of Rain 2, like most people, you'll like how that feels. But the servers for the game are up and people are playing it and giving feedback on it without there being even a hint of it being a business yet, of it even being a commercial product of any sort. A far cry from, the lottery of Counter-Strike 2. Deadlock is unfinished, and there is no hint of them wanting to implement cosmetics or season passes or missions or objectives or even a proper ranked mode at the moment, despite it having been in the game for a while. When you open up Deadlock, you are playing the game just because you want to play the game. It's like it's 1999 or something. There's no trackers, there's no progression bars, there's no store, there's no nothing. You're playing it for the joy of playing the video game. To me, the fact that there are so many people willing to ignore all the carrots on sticks that modern games apply, and I'm not criticizing them, they can be very well done, and I really enjoy the progression of a lot of games and having those sorts of elements, but the fact that it doesn't, and people like me choose to play it for hours and hours and hours, is just the proof of how good, how polished, how smart so much of Deadlock is. And to me, it's the proof that eventually, be it with a marketplace and crates, sort of like TF2, or something along the lines of Counter-Strike, or with a more traditional modern just season pass progression system or a store, I feel like Deadlock could also be an incredibly successful product in the sense of actually making Valve money, which again, they have so much of it and they're a privately owned company with only 336 employees that really does beg the question, do they even care anymore? But you know, smart financial decisions would lead you to believe that they do at least a bit. But then again, they've already canned 4 different versions of Half-Life 3 and those development costs don't seem to bother them or affect them. So yeah, no, I'm saying that there's a chance that Deadlock never actually even comes out, but I think that would be a shame because not only is it an amazing game with absolutely impeccable execution of ideas that so many people have tried before, that they have flirted with before, but if it came out and started raking in money, it would also be a masterclass to the industry, that the priority is not on what you're going to be able to sell the customers and how you're going to be able to make money off of something, and instead, it's on creating something that is just so damn good on its own that people choose to play it. And if you have something like that, people will then eventually choose to pay. It's the free-to-play live service model kind of done right, because that really doesn't enter the equation, and it's not even in the equation at the moment. I play Deadlock so much because I just enjoy it. And I hope I've expressed in this video how from top to bottom, there's so much about it that is just excellent. Now, there's a ton of complaints and balance and things, and you know how things are, from the pause lock memes for those of you who are into the game, to maybe some questionable balance decisions over the patches, which, sure, unfinished game and all, but that doesn't ever harm how the core of it is kind of magical. My expectations for the future of Deadlock are incredibly high, and I really don't want anything more than to see the game come out, succeed, and have a huge audience so that I can play it more with more people of my skill level instead of the current way that things are, which is, you know, I kind of do have to log in at peak hours if I want to have a match that feels balanced. And I think that's just the perfect indication of how good I think it is. It's a teaching tool of just multiplayer design. It's a teaching tool of how to actually approach video game development. And it's also a reminder that video games can be incredibly fun to play and master and compete in and get invested in, even when there's no carrot and no stick. And that's why I hope that this video maybe didn't encourage you to go and try the game out, but it did show you why a game like Deadlock really matters, why it should exist, and why it's so interesting to look at, think about, and even if you don't want to play it, kind of observe it from the distance and see where it might go. And I personally just kind of can't wait to see where it does. In any case, I've been Mug. Thank you so much for watching. And if you want more from me, if you enjoyed this that much, you think I've earned your subscription because I gave you something worth your time, then subscribe or check out the channel. Check out some of the other things I do and maybe that'll convince you. If not, I still hope you had a wonderful day, and I'm very thankful that you're here watching. A very special thanks to the members of The Wall, be they on Patreon or here on YouTube, that directly support what I do here. It means the world that you guys go above and beyond for what I do. At the end of the day, just go out there and enjoy some great video games. Maybe even try Deadlock if you haven't before, or check back in with all of these updates, and I will see you again very soon.